What if I told you she didn't leave because of something you lacked, but because of something you were growing into? A version of you she could no longer manage, control, or predict. I know that's not what we've been told. We're trained to believe love fails because we weren't enough, that maybe if we were more romantic, more available, more emotional, she would have stayed. But what if that narrative is wrong? What if her leaving had nothing to do with a failure, and everything to do with your becoming? See, there's a moment every man hits when the pain no longer consumes him, it forges him. That moment is not when the heartbreak happens, but when the illusion breaks. When you stop believing she was your piece and start realizing she was your test. That's where the transformation begins. And here's the real shift. Her ego didn't flee because of your weakness. It fled because it couldn't stand the heat of your awakening. You weren't falling apart. You were growing. And growth terrifies control. Now think about this. How often do we confuse silence for rejection? Her distance for your failure? But what if her distance is just ego in retreat? What if you've already become the man she feared you'd evolve into? The one she can no longer emotionally leash. The one whose mind she can no longer read. The man who no longer seeks permission to be powerful. This video isn't for the man still begging for answers. It's for the one staring at himself in the mirror, knowing deep down that he's not broken, he's becoming. You're not here to be understood by someone who walked away. You're here to become the kind of man who doesn't flinch when left. The man who builds in silence, leads with presence, and dominates through detachment. Stoicism isn't just a mindset, it's a battlefield where emotional discipline becomes your armor, and presence becomes your weapon. That's why in the next few minutes, we're not just going to talk about heartbreak. We're going to dismantle it, and use every shard as a stepping stone into something untouchable. You'll walk away with tenacious clarity, emotional control, and a fire that no rejection can extinguish. This isn't just another self-help sermon. This is a war plan for reclaiming your power and owning your evolution. So if you've been haunted by her silence, if her absence has echoed louder than her words ever did, don't look away now. The truth you've been avoiding is the exact truth that will set you free. The most dangerous version of you is about to emerge, and she'll never be able to reach him again. Ready to find out why her ego can't handle the man you're becoming? Stay locked in. Because what's coming next will change everything. 1. Pain as the initiation. It always starts in the silence. That hollow space after she's gone where your chest feels carved out, your thoughts spiral, and you replay every conversation like a broken record you didn't ask to own. But let me ask you something. What if this silence isn't your punishment, but your passage? What if everything you're feeling right now, the ache, the confusion, the sense of being lost, isn't evidence that you're broken, but proof that you're being rebuilt? Most men fear pain because they were never taught what it really is. We label it as weakness, as failure, as something to be avoided at all costs. But here's the truth Stoicism never shied away from. Pain is the gate. The raw, unfiltered threshold between the man you were and the man you're meant to become. And no one gets to skip it. Think about this. When she left, it wasn't just a relationship that ended. A version of you died, the one who believed you had to earn love by shrinking, compromising, contorting. The boy who needed to be seen to feel whole. That version was never built to endure what life requires of a man. So when the heartbreak came, it didn't just hurt, it revealed. It tore away the illusion that you needed her to feel valuable, and left you staring at a truth most men never face. Your worth can't depend on someone else's decision to stay. The pain you're feeling is not chaos. It's the furnace. The forge. The exact fire where your softness burns off and your stillness is shaped. But what most men do? They run from it. They numb it with distractions, another woman, another party, another dopamine hit. They try to skip the process, bypass the burn. But you? If you're still here, if you're still listening, then you already sense that escape is a trap. You don't evolve by avoiding discomfort. You evolve by walking into it fully awake and letting it do what it came to do, strip the illusions and hammer the core. Stoicism doesn't tell you not to feel. That's the biggest misunderstanding. It tells you to feel everything, and still not fold. To let grief live in your bones, to let loneliness echo in your room, but to never let those things decide who you are. You think she hurt you? She did you a favor. Because if she hadn't left, you'd still be living under the illusion that love is supposed to validate you instead of reveal you. But now, with her gone, you're exposed. And in that exposure, you finally see what's always been there, your unfinished self, your raw potential, your untapped resilience. And I'll be honest with you, this stage you're in, it's brutal. It's nights you can't sleep and mornings you wish you could skip. It's scrolling through memories hoping to find closure in pixels. But this isn't punishment. This is purification. Every tear, every unanswered text, every wave of regret, it's all part of the breakdown required for breakthrough. The only question is, will you sit in it? Will you let the pain speak instead of trying to shut it up? Because the man who sits in pain without trying to escape is the man who emerges unshakable. You might feel weak now, but that's part of the test. Not because you are weak, but because strength isn't born in comfort. It's born in collapse. The strongest men you admire, they weren't built in peace. They were built in betrayal, in failure, in disappointment. Just like you are now. And here's the part no one will tell you. This pain doesn't just hurt, it instructs. It teaches. It reveals every lie you've told yourself, about needing her, about your worth being tied to validation, about needing to be chosen to feel complete. It's brutal, but it's honest. So now ask yourself, who are you without her? Not the man you pretended to be to win her affection, but the man that stands here now, gutted and sober. Can you meet him? Can you sit with him? Can you stop blaming her long enough to thank her? Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning. Her absence is not the tragedy. It's the space where you finally start becoming dangerous, not reckless, not bitter, but focused, disciplined, self-contained. Most men don't make it through this phase. They relapse into comfort. They rebuild themselves just enough to be liked again. But that's not the mission. The mission is to go so deep into the fire that you come out unrecognizable. And that only happens when you stop needing the pain to go away and start letting it work on you. When you stop asking, "Why did she leave me?" and start asking, "What part of me was ready to die?" The boy who needed her is gone. He had to be. Because the man you're becoming, the one who no longer seeks permission to be powerful, he couldn't exist while that boy still ran the show. So this grief you're carrying? It's sacred. It's the ceremony. The ritual. The unspoken initiation every man must go through if he ever wants to stop reacting and start commanding. You're not here to feel better. You're here to get better. So don't numb it. Don't post about it. Don't vent to everyone who'll listen. Sit in it. Breathe through it. Write. Train. Work. Let the pain rewire your nervous system. Let it dig deep. Because when it's done, when the fire has consumed every excuse, you'll be left with something unshakable, clarity. Not just about her, but about you. About who you are. And more importantly, who you'll never be again. You'll remember how you used to text just to get her attention. How you used to contort your truth just to keep her interested. How you abandoned your standards just to not feel alone. And you'll shake your head, not in shame, but in gratitude. Because that pain was the proof. That discomfort was the turning point. That silence was the doorway. You don't need her closure. You don't need revenge. You don't need one more conversation. You just need this moment. This pain. This fire. This is your Stoic Relationships moment. The one where heartbreak doesn't break you, it builds you. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. It doesn't make you cruel. It makes you committed to your own growth, your own peace, your own evolution. Because one day, she might see you again. She might scroll and wonder. She might sense your absence in ways she can't name. But by then, it won't matter. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you've already won the only war that matters, the one within. That's Stoicism in its purest form. not avoiding emotion, mastering it, not suppressing pain, transcending it. And maybe that's the real reason her ego can't handle who you're becoming. Because you no longer need her to become him. 2. The threat of your evolution. She didn't leave because you were weak. She left because something in you started shifting, something her ego wasn't prepared for. That quiet fire you tried to suppress, the self-respect you began reclaiming, the inner storm building behind your calm eyes, she felt it before you even fully understood it. And here's what most men never realize. Growth isn't just something you experience, it's something others feel. And when a woman has been used to holding emotional leverage, the moment you start rising, her ego starts retreating. People don't always fear your flaws. What really scares them is your transformation, because transformation means they can no longer predict or control you. That's exactly what happened. You started evolving, and she started withdrawing. Not consciously at first. But emotionally, psychologically, she could sense it. You were no longer the same man who apologized just to end a fight you didn't start. You were no longer the man who softened his edges to make her feel secure. You started pulling your energy inward, and suddenly her validation didn't feel as necessary. That's when the dynamic cracked. Let's be real, evolution makes people uncomfortable, especially when they benefited from your previous version. And most men don't realize that when you change, you disrupt the emotional economy around you. She was invested in who you were, accessible, reactive, always reaching out, always trying. But when that man starts detaching, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in presence, it sends a ripple through the ego that was used to being fed. Ask yourself, did she really fall out of love, or did she fall out of control? Was it really about compatibility, or was it about the shift in power? These are the uncomfortable questions most won't ask. But in Stoic relationships, this clarity is essential. Because until you understand the true nature of your evolution, you'll mislabel it as the reason she left, instead of seeing it as the very reason you needed her to. You weren't becoming a problem, you were becoming powerful. And power without permission? That's what she couldn't stomach. Think back, when did the tension really start? Not when you failed to meet her needs, but when you started meeting your own. When you stopped asking for her opinion on every move. When you started asserting boundaries. When you began choosing solitude over chaotic connection. That's when the energy shifted. That's when her comfort began to erode. Because for the first time, you weren't orbiting her emotions, you were grounded in your own. That unsettled her, because your independence revealed her dependence. Your stillness exposed her chaos. Your discipline highlighted her inconsistency. And that's when the silent war began. Not a war of words, but of energy. You were elevating, and she was panicking. Because love rooted in control can't survive the presence of a man who no longer needs to be chosen. Most men think they need to dim their growth to maintain peace. But peace at the cost of self-respect isn't peace. It's slow erosion. And here's what Stoicism teaches at its core. Your duty is not to stay digestible for people who fear your strength. Your duty is to become undeniable. To evolve so fully that your mere presence demands a recalibration of how others approach you. Not because you shouted, but because you no longer seek their applause. Let's be honest, part of you saw the signs. Her subtle withdrawal. Her cold tone. Her sudden distance. But instead of recognizing it as fear, you blamed yourself. You thought maybe you were too cold, too focused, too stoic. But no. You were simply becoming a man who no longer begged for connection. A man who found depth in his own silence. And that silence? It terrified her ego. Because she couldn't read it, couldn't bend it, couldn't soften it. You became less available, and she interpreted that as emotional threat. Not because you disrespected her, but because you stopped prioritizing her comfort over your character. That shift? That's what turned her affection into anxiety. Because people who only love your vulnerability will always retreat when faced with your power. And what's tragic is that they'll tell themselves you changed. But the truth? You just stopped pretending. Now here's the paradox. The more you elevated, the more she pulled away. Not because you failed, but because she no longer felt in control. And rather than rise with you, she retreated. That's not your burden to carry. Her inability to hold space for your evolution doesn't make you too much. It just makes her unprepared. And one of the most stoic decisions you'll ever make is realizing that not everyone is meant to witness your next chapter. You weren't becoming cruel. You were becoming clear. You weren't shutting down. You were locking in. Your energy was no longer accessible on demand. That alone shifts everything. Because when someone can't predict you, they can't control you. And the moment you became unreadable, you became untouchable. That's what broke her, not your absence, but your evolution. You see, this isn't just about a breakup. This is about transformation. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that doesn't explain itself. And you might not see it now, but one day you'll realize that her departure wasn't abandonment. It was the resistance to your elevation. She couldn't handle the frequency you were rising into. And so she stepped back. Not out of logic, but out of fear. Because your growth shined too bright a light on her shadows. So now, as you continue on this path, one built on stoicism, purpose, and presence, understand this: not everyone will celebrate who you're becoming. Some will fear it. Others will resent it. But the real ones? The ones meant to walk with you. They'll rise with you. They'll recognize the storm in your silence and find peace in your strength. That's Stoic Relationships at work. Two sovereign energies walking in alignment, not codependence. So if this resonates, if you're in the middle of this quiet, potent transformation, don't pause. Don't regress to make others comfortable. Keep going. Keep becoming. Because the man who chooses his path over permission is the man the world eventually cannot ignore. And if you've felt the shift, if you've seen the fear in their eyes when your energy stopped begging, then you know you're on the right track. You're not losing people. You're shedding what couldn't grow with you. Like and comment number 1 if this part of the message is hitting deep for you. Subscribe for more content that strengthens your mind, sharpens your path, and respects your becoming. We're just getting started. 3. Detachment is power. Most men misunderstand detachment. They hear the word and assume it means coldness, apathy, or indifference. But real detachment, stoic detachment, isn't about shutting down. It's about standing tall. It's about remaining internally anchored no matter how violently the external world tries to pull you off course. When she left, she expected one of two things: a desperate reaction or an emotional collapse. She didn't expect silence. She didn't expect calm. She didn't expect you to disappear, not in bitterness, but in discipline. And that silence? That choice to withhold reaction? That was the first signal that you were no longer operating from emotion. You were operating from power. She thought the break would break you. That you'd chase, beg, explain. That you'd scroll her stories, post for attention, or collapse into distractions. But what happened instead was far more unsettling. You withdrew. You turned your focus inward. You detached not to punish her, but to preserve yourself. And in that choice, you redefined the entire dynamic. Because detachment isn't about pretending not to care. It's about realizing that caring doesn't require you to lose yourself in the process. Detachment says, I see everything, but I don't react to everything. And that kind of emotional control, it's rare. Most men leak their energy through reactions. They burn themselves out trying to be understood, trying to win back someone who already showed they couldn't hold their presence. But Stoicism teaches a different path. A quieter, more dangerous one. The man who detaches without disconnecting from himself becomes magnetic. He commands space not by seeking it, but by embodying it. Think about it. When did you start feeling your own strength again? Wasn't it when you stopped checking your phone? When you deleted the drafts you never sent? When you no longer needed her to validate your silence? That was the moment detachment began. Not because you were done feeling, but because you were done bleeding for someone who didn't know how to hold your depth. Detachment doesn't kill emotion. It purifies it. It separates love from attachment, loyalty from need, connection from control. And here's where it gets powerful. When you detach, you become unreadable. And in the absence of predictability, you become a mystery. Her ego can't track you anymore. It can't bait you into reaction. It can't test your temperature with subtle texts or empty gestures. That void you left? It speaks louder than any post ever could. She feels it, not because you made noise, but because you became absent in a way that no longer seeks to be noticed. That's when the real tension begins. Not on your end, but hers. Because the man she thought would crumble has become still. And in that stillness, he's rising. Not publicly. Not theatrically. But quietly, dangerously. Detachment allows you to operate in solitude, to build without broadcasting, to evolve without seeking applause. And the longer you stay in that space, the more your energy sharpens. This is where Stoic relationships differentiate from the rest. Because you're no longer operating on emotional reciprocity. You're operating on internal alignment. You're not waiting for her to reach out. You're not hoping she notices your absence. You're simply becoming more of what she couldn't handle. Not for revenge. For integrity. She expected your world to pause. She expected you to orbit hers. But when you broke that pattern, when you stopped performing for her attention, her ego started to starve. That's the part no one sees. The emotional ecosystem she created depended on your reactions. On your effort. On your accessibility. But you've shifted. And now, she's not facing the old version of you. She's facing a man who doesn't chase, doesn't fold, doesn't explain. And here's the thing. Your detachment, if rooted in truth, not ego, will do more damage to her ego than any speech, any argument, any closure. Because the man who can walk away without bitterness, who can remain kind but unavailable, who can live without needing to be seen, that man becomes a force. A frequency. A presence she won't forget. Not because he made her feel small, but because he made himself untouchable. This is the discipline most never reach. Because it's hard. It's lonely. It's counterintuitive. The world screams at you to post, to prove, to be seen. But Stoicism whispers, stay silent, stay solid, stay sovereign. The man who detaches for peace will always outlast the man who performs for attention. Because peace, real peace, is unshakable. It's not situational. It's internal. So ask yourself, what are you really detaching from? Not just her. But the version of you that needed her to feel whole. The version of you that tied worth to response, value to validation. That man has no place where you're going. He can't survive in the presence you're now building. Detachment isn't a tactic. It's a transformation. It's the shedding of every pattern that made you predictable. And it's working. You feel it. You're less reactive. Less desperate. More focused. More grounded. You're not explaining your worth anymore. You're embodying it. And that embodiment, that stillness, is what changes the entire game. Not just for her, but for you. You're no longer accessible to chaos. And that in itself makes you magnetic. Not because you're trying to be, but because clarity radiates. There's a reason you're being pulled into silence. There's a reason you no longer want to chase. It's not depression. It's not indifference. It's evolution. It's the beginning of the man you've always been, stripped of every codependent pattern. You're not running away. You're rising up. In solitude. In strength. In stoic detachment. You want to know what real power looks like? It's when you can see the bait and choose not to bite. When you can hear the silence and choose not to fill it. When you can feel the emotion and choose not to be ruled by it. That's not avoidance. That's self-mastery. And she'll feel it. Even if she never admits it. Especially if she doesn't understand it. Because the man she thought she left is no longer there. In his place is something far more potent. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be respected. You're not here to win her back. You're here to win yourself back. Detachment makes that possible. It frees you from the need to be chosen. And once you no longer need to be chosen, you become the one who chooses. That's the turning point. That's where everything shifts. So don't confuse this stillness with stagnation. You're not stuck. You're building. You're not numb. You're focused. You're not hiding. You're preparing. Because the man who detaches from ego, from need, from emotional theatrics, that man is unstoppable. And when you emerge from this season, stronger, quieter, more deliberate, she won't recognize you. Not because you've changed, but because you've finally become what you were always meant to be. 4. Silence as a statement. There comes a moment when you stop trying to explain yourself. When you no longer feel the urge to speak just to be understood. That moment is not resignation, it's arrival. The arrival of your stillness. And for men who've been trained to perform, to fix, to clarify their worth through words, that silence feels foreign at first. But over time, it becomes the sharpest edge of your presence. Because when your words stop chasing, your energy starts commanding. And nothing exposes the truth of a man more than his ability to remain still in the face of emotional noise. She expected you to fill the silence. To reach out. To check in. To beg, even subtly, for closure. But when the silence grew and you didn't flinch, when your voice didn't break the quiet, something else started breaking. Her certainty. That's what ego can handle, not loudness, not anger, not retaliation, but silence. Because silence isn't empty. It's a message. A declaration. A mirror that says, I don't chase what chooses confusion. Your silence doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you chose peace over performance. It means you finally understood that some things don't deserve your explanation. Some exits don't warrant a response. Because when someone walks away and you remain still, it forces them to face their decision in a way words never could. That's not passive. That's powerful. And in Stoic relationships, that kind of restraint is the rarest form of strength. Every man reaches a crossroads. Keep trying to be heard, or let your silence echo louder than your pain. You chose the latter. And that choice shook her more than any apology, any rant, any plea ever would have. Because what she expected was your chaos. What she got was your calm. And in that calm, she felt something she never expected, distance she didn't control. We often believe our voice is our power. But the truth? Our power is in our poise. In our restraint. In our refusal to break our own peace just to be acknowledged. There's a reason Stoicism teaches emotional discipline. It's not to suppress you. It's to protect you. From chasing validation. From exhausting your energy on people who won't respect your clarity. From giving explanations to people who never earned your truth. So many men spill their soul to women who already made their decision. They write long texts. They send voice notes. They try to find the perfect words to be understood. But what they don't realize is that the more they speak, the more their energy gets devalued. Because when someone's ego is in control, they don't listen to understand. They listen to maintain leverage. And the more you talk, the more they believe they still have access. But you didn't give her that. You didn't break. You didn't explain. You didn't try to reset the connection. And in that refusal, in that deep silence, you reclaimed more than your pride, you reclaimed your power. She might check your profile. She might send subtle pings. She might try to bait you back into conversation. But you're no longer reacting. Because you've reached the level where presence matters more than performance. Where clarity matters more than connection. Where you'd rather lose someone than lose yourself. Ask yourself this: what have you really lost? A woman who couldn't handle your truth? A connection that couldn't survive your growth? That's not loss. That's realignment. And your silence is the announcement of that realignment. Not with noise, but with dignity. With grace. With sovereignty. That's the energy most men never access, because it requires restraint. It requires enduring the discomfort of not being seen, not being heard, not being chosen, and still choosing yourself anyway. This is why silence is not weakness. It's the final stage of emotional independence. It's when your nervous system no longer spikes at her absence. When your day no longer pauses waiting for her reply. When your nights are no longer haunted by what-if scenarios. Silence doesn't mean you've stopped feeling. It means you've started healing. On your terms. At your pace. Without needing a witness. And that shift? It doesn't just change your relationship with her. It changes your relationship with yourself. You stop trying to fix everything. You stop internalizing rejection. You stop believing you need to perform to be loved. Because now, your silence is not a defense mechanism. It's a choice. A deliberate act of self-respect. A reminder to yourself that not every battle deserves your effort. She might say you ghosted. She might tell herself you shut down. But deep down, she knows the truth. You simply stopped playing the game. You stopped feeding the dynamic. And in doing so, you became the first man she couldn't manipulate with confusion. That stings more than any words you could have said. Because it means you're no longer reachable. Not physically, not emotionally, not energetically. And that's the kind of man who becomes unforgettable. Not because he tried to be, but because he was willing to walk away without drama, without noise, without need. That's stoicism in action. Not just a quote on your feed, but a way of life. A discipline. A philosophy embodied in your posture, your responses, your restraint. That's what separates boys from men. One reacts to absence, the other rises through it. You're no longer giving her reasons. You're giving her silence. And that silence is not petty. It's not vindictive. It's surgical. Precise. Exact. Because you've realized that not everyone deserves the explanation of your evolution. Some people only understand who you were, not who you're becoming. And that's okay. They're not supposed to come with you. And your silence is the closing chapter they won't be able to rewrite. This is where your power crystallizes. Not in proving you're healed, but in showing that healing doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real, quiet, consistent, and lived. And the longer you remain in that space, the clearer it becomes. You don't need anyone to notice your worth. You just need to stop proving it to people who can't see it. So if you've been silent, stay silent. If you've withdrawn, stay grounded. If you've chosen clarity over chaos, keep walking. Because the man who can sit in stillness, who can hold the line, who can stand in his truth without broadcasting it, that man becomes a storm. Not because he raises his voice, but because he no longer needs to speak to be heard. If this part of the message resonates with you, like and comment number 1 below. Your voice matters, but your silence might just be your power. And if you're walking this path, if you're becoming that man, subscribe for more truths that meet you in your evolution. We're walking this journey together. Quietly. Relentlessly. 5. She was the test, not the piece. There's a narrative men often cling to after a breakup, the belief that she was their piece. That somehow, in her presence, they found calm, clarity, safety. But that belief doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Because if she truly was your piece, her absence wouldn't have caused so much internal chaos. What she really was? A test. A mirror. A storm. The exact force sent to expose the fractures you tried to hide under affection, compromise, and emotional dependency. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep mourning someone who wasn't your answer, but your awakening. You looked at her like a destination, a place you finally arrived at after struggling through your own doubts. She felt like home, didn't she? But homes don't abandon you when the weather gets rough. What you found wasn't a safe space, it was a reflection. She mirrored back to you every part of yourself you hadn't healed yet. The need for approval. The fear of abandonment. The impulse to perform to be loved. All of it surfaced in her presence. That's not peace. That's exposure. And the truth is, you needed it. You needed someone to press against your weakest points. You needed to feel the collapse. Because without the collapse, there is no rebuilding. Without the storm, there is no refinement. That's what Stoicism reminds us. You don't become strong by avoiding conflict. You become strong by enduring it. She didn't break you. She revealed you. And in that revelation, you were handed a decision: remain the man she left, or become the man her absence demands. There are moments you look back and wonder what you could have done differently. Could you have been more present? Less reactive? More emotionally intelligent? But those questions come from the part of you still trying to rewrite the past. The wiser question is this: what did this pain uncover about who I was pretending to be? Because you were pretending. Not maliciously. Not even consciously. But you were shrinking. Hiding your standards to keep her comfortable. Quieting your truth to avoid conflict. That's not peace. That's slow self-abandonment. Her leaving wasn't rejection, it was redirection. She didn't take something from you. She returned you to yourself. Every tear you shed, every night you couldn't sleep, every text you deleted instead of sending, it wasn't weakness. It was part of the detox. You were releasing a version of yourself that depended on her presence to feel validated. And now you're starting to realize that the grief isn't about losing her. It's about losing the illusion. She was never your healer. She was your initiation. And the sooner you stop romanticizing the past, the sooner you'll see the gift in the wreckage. The gift was never her love. It was the clarity her departure gave you. The clarity to see what you need to build. The clarity to define what you will no longer tolerate. The clarity to stop chasing what doesn't honor your growth. And that clarity, it changes everything. Most men don't pass the test. They get stuck. They recycle the pain. They jump into new relationships hoping to escape the echoes of the last one. But Stoic relationships aren't built on escape. They're built on excavation. On going deep into your discomfort and finding the raw material of your next level. You passed the test not when you got her back, but when you stopped needing to. And here's the twist: she might come back. Not out of love, but out of curiosity. Out of ego. Out of the need to see if she still has access. But by then, the man she left won't exist anymore. And what she'll find is not resentment, but distance. Not anger, but calm. Not need, but presence. That presence? That's your rebirth. That's the man forged in the fire of her absence. You'll start to notice it too. You'll respond slower. Speak less. Think deeper. You'll stop explaining your value and start embodying it. That shift is internal, but it reflects in everything. From your posture to your conversations. And the people around you will feel it. Some will respect it. Some will resist it. But none will ignore it. Because men who pass the test become different. You stop chasing women who confuse you. You stop entertaining energy that drains you. You stop compromising on your standards just to be chosen. And for the first time, you start choosing yourself, not as a reaction, but as a principle. That's when Stoicism becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes a posture, a rhythm, a way of moving through the world with intention and integrity. And it's not just about her anymore. It's about every area of your life. Your work, your fitness, your mental clarity. You no longer need permission to show up fully. You do it because you've seen what happens when you shrink. You've lived the consequences of trying to be someone's peace while abandoning your own. That lesson? You won't forget it. Because it was carved into you through silence, loneliness, and deep reflection. So no, she wasn't your peace. She was the pressure, the friction, the necessary disruption, the weight that tested your foundation. And now that she's gone, you've had to build that foundation for real. You've had to pour into yourself, repair your structure, fortify your purpose. That's why you don't hate her. Because without her, you wouldn't have met this version of you. Let her go. Not out of resentment, but out of reverence for what she unknowingly gave you. She gave you the wound. And that wound became the window. The window into a man who doesn't collapse when left, who doesn't compromise his values to be seen, who doesn't confuse affection with alignment. That man? He's rare. Because he didn't just survive the test. He built something from it. You'll know you've healed when your memory stops aching. When her name becomes neutral. When you can reflect without craving. That's not numbness. That's mastery. Emotional mastery. The kind Stoicism develops not through quotes, but through crucibles. Through moments that break most men. But not you. Because you didn't run from the test. You sat in it. Learned from it. Evolved through it. And now? You walk with a different weight. A different quiet. A different code. The man who searched for peace in someone else now lives it from within. And that peace? No one can take it from you. Because it wasn't given. It was earned. Through loss. Through silence. Through fire. Through becoming. 6. You don't reopen closed doors. There comes a point where your silence becomes more than a defense mechanism. It becomes a boundary. A quiet line drawn not out of spite, but out of clarity. You've seen what happens when you go back to what broke you. You've tasted the cycle of confusion, hope, letdown. You've begged, reasoned, negotiated with yourself. And now, finally, there's stillness. Because you've learned something that most never do. Not every closed door is meant to be knocked on again. Especially when you were the only one ever turning the handle. She might come back. That thought alone is enough to make most men stumble. She might text. Call. Watch your stories. Comment something cryptic. Suddenly, she's back in your orbit, and every memory reactivates. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. But here's the distinction. The man who is still governed by his emotions will see her return as a second chance. The man who has become stoic sees it for what it is, a test. This test isn't about her. It's about you. About your growth. About whether you've truly detached from the need to be chosen. Because if she left you in silence, if she vanished when you needed clarity, if she watched you bleed and turned away, that tells you everything. And no apology, no nostalgic message, no sudden burst of interest can erase that history. The mistake most men make? Reopening the door just to feel desired again. But desire without respect is a game. And you're not here to be played with anymore. You built something in the dark. Your mindset. Your strength. Your stoic discipline. You started becoming the man you were always meant to be. Not in reaction to her absence, but in the power of it. And now, she's curious again. But don't confuse curiosity with care. Don't mistake ego with love. When someone returns, it's rarely because they've changed. It's usually because they can sense you have. And the ego wants to confirm that it still holds power. She'll come back with softness. With familiarity. With reminders. She'll test the waters, not because she's ready to swim, but because she wants to know if she still causes waves. And the moment you break character, text back too soon, answer too fast, invite her in with unspoken desperation, you reset the entire cycle. The control, the confusion, the emotional leash, it all returns. Not because she's malicious, but because the ego will always seek validation from what it once dominated. You're not bitter. You're awake. And that awareness is what protects you now. Because the man who understands his worth no longer accepts crumbs. He doesn't get flattered by attention that once abandoned him. He doesn't open doors to the past and expect new experiences to walk through. He knows that peace isn't found in replays, it's built in progress. There's a deeper truth here, one that stoic relationships are rooted in, self-respect over history. She may say she misses the old you. But the old you doesn't exist anymore. He died in the wreckage. In the silence. In the sleepless nights and unreturned messages. And what rose from that grief was something she didn't expect, a man who no longer waits. A man who no longer negotiates with ghosts. A man who no longer flinches at familiar faces. Her return isn't romantic. It's strategic. Even if she doesn't realize it consciously. Her ego wants to check in. To see if the door is still cracked. To see if your transformation was real or just performance. But this time, you don't answer. You don't explain. You don't reopen. Not because you hate her. But because you love your evolution more. And yes, it's hard. Because some part of you still remembers the good, the laughter, the chemistry, the moments where it felt like maybe, just maybe, this was it. But you also remember the silence, the mixed signals, the way she watched you crumble and chose distance instead of support. You remember who she was when it mattered. And that memory is what you carry, not with pain, but with precision. You've outgrown her. Not just emotionally, but energetically. You've entered a space where your peace is no longer negotiable, where your standards are no longer flexible, where your vision for your life no longer includes people who couldn't hold your pain. That clarity, that unwavering, non-emotional clarity, is what makes you untouchable now. And here's the irony. The more stoic you become, the more your silence haunts her. Not because you're trying to hurt her, but because she expected you to wait. She expected you to remain emotionally available, just in case. And now that you've gone dark, now that you've redirected all your energy inward, now that you've detached with love and walked away without noise, she realizes she's lost access to something rare. Your depth. Your loyalty. Your presence. And what makes it unbearable is that you didn't slam the door. You just stopped holding it open. You've heard this before. If it's meant to be, it'll come back. But here's what Stoicism adds. And if it does, you'll decide if it still aligns with who you've become. Because being meant for each other isn't just about attraction. It's about timing, maturity, values. And if someone couldn't handle your becoming, they were never meant for your becoming. They were just part of what triggered it. You don't hate her. You're grateful. Because without her departure, you'd still be in the illusion. Still chasing. Still doubting. Still performing. Her absence created space for your essence. And now, that essence doesn't bend. It doesn't seek. It doesn't reopen. It moves forward. Quietly. Decisively. Stoically. So when the message comes, and it will, pause. Not out of fear, but out of respect. For yourself. For the journey. For the man you've become. And remember this, just because someone returns, doesn't mean they belong. Some people are chapters. Others are lessons. She was both. But this is the part where you turn the page. Not out of spite, but out of sovereignty. You are no longer the man who reacts. You are the man who reflects, who recalibrates, who rises. Her ego might want to revisit the past, but you've outgrown it. And in that truth, you find peace. Not because you shut the door out of pride, but because you finally understand the cost of leaving it open. This is the final test. Can you walk away without needing closure? Can you maintain your path when the past calls with familiar comfort? Can you stay grounded in who you are, even when the echo of who you were tries to pull you back? The answer must be yes. Because the man who reopens closed doors out of fear or nostalgia hasn't learned the lesson yet. You have. And that's why she can't reach you anymore. Not because you've disappeared, but because you've risen. Quietly. Completely. And unshakably. If this resonates, if this part spoke to something deep in your process, like and comment number 1 below. And subscribe if you're ready to keep walking this stoic path with us. This is more than a video. It's a movement. Your growth is your greatest revenge. Let's keep becoming. There's a version of you that once begged for answers, for closure, for some kind of emotional relief that never came. He stayed up at night trying to make sense of it all. He analyzed her silences, replayed the last conversations, questioned his every move, hoping to find a flaw to fix. That version of you wasn't weak, he was human. But he was also unfinished. Because the truth is, the man who waits for closure is still seeking permission. Permission to move on. Permission to reclaim his power. Permission to let go. But the man you've become doesn't need permission anymore. He doesn't ask the past to explain itself. He thanks it for what it taught, and then he walks forward, alone if necessary, but never lost. Every moment you spent in pain was not wasted. Every question you asked, every tear you held back, every text you never sent, It all shapes something deeper. A presence. A foundation. A weight. And now, that weight is no longer tied to grief. It's tied to depth. To experience. To a level of inner control most men never reach. That's what Stoicism demands. Not that you feel nothing, but that you become master of everything you feel. You've learned that control is not about domination. It's about choice. You choose your energy now. You choose where your mind goes. You choose what gets your time. And that discipline, the one you built in the quiet, is what now protects you from returning to things that broke you. It's what stops you from answering when ghosts reach out. It's what silences the noise inside when old emotions try to reattach themselves to your new identity. This identity wasn't handed to you. It was forged. And forging isn't pretty. It's violent. It's isolating. It's painful. You weren't just dumped. You were stripped. Of illusion. Of attachment. Of everything you thought defined you. And in that rawness, you met the only thing that matters, your essence. The part of you that exists without her. The part of you that rises, even when nothing around you gives a reason to. So many men never get here. They numb the pain. They replace the woman. They repeat the same cycles with different faces. But you stopped. You sat in the wreckage. You chose silence over distraction. You chose growth over gratification. You chose to rebuild, not to be seen, but to become. And that choice is why you're untouchable now. Not emotionally distant, but emotionally grounded. Not cold, but clear. And yes, she'll feel the shift. She might already. But that's no longer the point. The point was never to make her regret. The point was to become the man who no longer needs her to. The man whose peace doesn't depend on whether or not she ever sees his worth. Because now you see it. And when a man truly sees his worth, the world starts responding differently, not because it's changed, but because he has. You'll notice it in subtle ways. You speak less but mean more. You engage less but impact more. You no longer chase, not because you're above love, but because you no longer seek it from those who once overlooked you. Your standards have evolved. Not because you've become arrogant, but because you've learned how expensive it is to entertain chaos. And you refuse to pay that price again. This is what happens when heartbreak becomes a hinge moment, when it no longer defines you, but redirects you. Every test you faced wasn't trying to break you. It was trying to strip you down to what's real. And what's real is this: you don't need anyone's validation to stand tall. You don't need anyone's attention to feel seen. You don't need anyone's return to move forward. You are the source now. And here's what's unexpected: peace feels different when it's earned. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It doesn't come with applause. It arrives quietly, settles deeply, and demands nothing. It just is. And because it isn't dependent on anyone else, it can't be taken. That's the kind of peace Stoicism cultivates. The kind that lives beneath the surface, unaffected by external storms. From here on out, your silence speaks louder than any past version of you ever could. It says, I no longer need to prove myself. It says, my energy is sacred. It says, not everyone deserves access. And the more you live in that energy, the more the world adapts. Because when a man becomes consistent in his presence, detached in his judgment, and unwavering in his values, he becomes rare. And rarity commands respect. So what now? Now you continue. Not in search of someone to complete you, but in pursuit of a life that reflects you. You pour into your craft, your discipline, your standards. You build something so powerful, so rooted, that no one can offer you peace. They simply recognize it when they meet you. And they adjust accordingly. Because the man who has rebuilt himself from ashes has nothing left to prove. She wasn't your ending. She was your ignition. And while part of you may still feel echoes of the past, they no longer pull you back. They simply remind you of how far you've come. You don't wish her harm. You don't wish her regret. You simply wish her away, from your future, from your energy, from the man you're still becoming. This is not the end of your healing. This is the beginning of your clarity. The part where your story no longer revolves around heartbreak, but around alignment, around becoming, around sovereignty. And that story? It doesn't need a crowd. It doesn't need her validation. It just needs you to keep showing up every day with the same quiet power that got you here. You didn't just survive heartbreak. You outgrew it. You learned that emotional self-respect is not about building walls. It's about knowing who's allowed in. And now you guard your peace not with hostility, but with standards. You walk with calm not because you feel nothing, but because you've mastered everything you feel. That's the essence of Stoic relationships, two whole people, walking in truth, without needing each other to be full. Your transformation was never about revenge. It was about return. Returning to yourself. Returning to your values. Returning to your path. And in doing so, you've become something unshakable. Something silent. Something sacred. The man who needed her is gone. The man she couldn't control has arrived. And in your eyes now lives a clarity that doesn't beg, doesn't explain, doesn't chase. This is who you are now, not because you chose it once, but because you choose it daily. You walk in discipline. You move in stillness. You speak in truth. And the more you do, the less you look back. Because what's behind you was necessary. But it's no longer relevant. You've crossed the threshold. From the man who was broken, to the man who bends for no one. From the man who waited, to the man who creates. From the man who chased, to the man who commands. And that's not heartbreak. That's transformation.